May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free of economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of do as little harm as possible. Today's podcast is the 12th in a series of reading pieces from a work in progress called Tassajara Stories. After a pause to meditate, we will go into today's. There's just one today. It's entitled Guests. One of those words, one of those English words, where you have, what do you call it? Unvocalized consonants. I mean, listen, Guests, guests. And I know there's, in phonetics, there's markers for that. But you don't have that sort of thing in all languages. There's languages where they speak in clicks. Oh, well, anyway, I think the Bushmen are famous for that, right? And you read that and you go, oh, man, that's really weird. They speak in clicks. But we speak, what do you call this? Tss. And wasps. Pretty cool. Like in Japanese, they've got, unless a syllable ends with an N, they've got to have a vowel after it, unless they really learn how to speak another language. But, I tend to be debido there. Debido chaduiku. And and San Francisco's, they don't have a C sound. They have she. So San Francisco. So how would they pronounce guests? Guestosu. Yeah, maybe something like that. But, if they learn to speak English to different degrees, they get beyond all that. Some things are hard to learn, though, in foreign languages that they do. There's just, I really admire people that learn Chinese. Wow, that sounds different. Okay, enough of a diversion there. So, when you hear the bell, hit pause if you wish and meditate for as long as you wish. And when you're through, hit unpause and we'll hit the bell to end the meditation or whatever you wish, period. And we'll get going with guests. Guests. The Becks had wanted us to continue with the guest season, and we did. Silas Hoadley made a good case for it. We'd need the money, and it would be good to have the grounding of interacting with the public, and they could get to know us. The Zen Center sent out a letter announcing the guest season schedule and rates to the Beck's mailing list and our own, and whatever other lists we could get. We had no bar, as with previous owners, did not serve or sell alcohol or tobacco, didn't sell anything. At first, maybe so, maybe a little book or something in the office at first. Some students smoked tobacco. They could order it on the town trip. Guests were free to bring their own booze in, same as today. Some of the very first guests that came were a group of farmers and businessmen from Watsonville, a couple of hours away. The Watsonville Domino Club. They'd get the best pine and stone rooms and drink whiskey and beer and charcoal broiled steaks on their back porches and get a little loud. No wives. I guess that people were informed before they arrived that we didn't serve alcohol or sell tobacco. We'd have to do that. But I don't remember, and I'm going to ask around. At first, of course, the guests were apprehensive about the new owners, wondering how cultish and weird we'd be. But after a couple of days on the first visit, I could see they were getting comfortable. The students were not nosy or judgmental, were busy working and doing those things we did in robes, and we weren't proselytizing. The Watsonville Domino Club came early in the guest season every year I was there. In May, I would visit with them, sometimes allowing them to bend my arm enough to sample their whiskey. They liked that, but couldn't understand why I had no interest in their steaks. We liked those guys too. I remember Bud, who owned Topless Vegetables, and Bert, whose family co-owned with another family, globally active Granite Construction. He said they were one of the 5 largest construction companies in the world and talked to me about the evils of the inheritance tax, which he said would not allow him to pass his business on to his kids. Well, that's been substantially changed since then. And I remember Mr. Porter. He was the oldest, had a potbelly, spindly legs, and a reddish face. One year they had an 80th birthday dinner for him. He grew strawberries, lots of them. He'd always bring in a bunch of boxes for us when he came. At his birthday dinner, we brought out a dessert we'd made using his strawberries. There was enough to make that dessert for all 60 guests and 60 students that evening. There were about 8 men at the Watsonville Domino Club table, all fairly plastered by the time the dessert came out. Mr. Porter blew out the 8 candles. There were calls of speech, speech. He stood up. The whole dining room crowd was quiet. The staff stood by politely. Mr. Porter picked up a large red strawberry from off his dessert. "This is one of my strawberries," he said, wobbling from left to right a little. "I'm very grateful to these strawberries. We grow fields of them that are covered in plastic so they don't get dirty and are easy to harvest. Then we burn the plastic and prepare the next planting. Safeway can't get enough of them. They ship all the way to the East Coast and are still big and red and firm when they hit the stores there. These strawberries have made me a rich man." He paused. "And they taste like cardboard." Uproar of laughter and applause from the whole room. A most popular guest, also from Watsonville, was Jack Novsich. Our first guest season was his 79th year and the 53rd year he'd come to Tassajara. He was a meat and potatoes guy who said the food had gone downhill since the Becks got the place, and then worse when we got it. But he liked us, and we liked him. He said he used to come with the Watsonville Domino Club and drink and hang out with them, but we were the perfect fit for his later years. He'd bring beer for the boys and candy for the girls. That's what he said once, but he'd give either to either. Most students there wouldn't drink his beer, so as not to hurt his feelings, I'd open one. Jack came from Yugoslavia in 1906. He said he bought a shovel for 75 cents and worked as a laborer on building Grand Central Station for $1 a day. Then he came out to San Francisco, where he said there was still plenty of work due to the devastating 1906 earthquake. For a while he worked at the Taddich Grill, which had been in business since the gold rush. Then he moved south to Watsonville. Jack knew more than anyone about that place and loved to talk about the history. In the mid-70s, he met two people who took a more in-depth interest in him and his memories. Marilyn McDonald met Jack the first day she arrived as a guest and was so fascinated with his stories that she embarked on 10 years of research into Tassajara history, the results of which were compiled in a scrapbook for the office that later became A Brief History of Tassajara. Laura Burgess came as a student, struck up a friendship with Jack, recorded his recollections, and kept up with him through the years. Jack was distinguished by his sweet smile and amicable disposition, his Serbian accent, his suspenders, his cane, and something else. Laura Burgess writes, "On January 6, 1914, Jack was working on a road crew in the Santa Cruz Mountains. His nickname was Dynamite Jack, and he helped build roads through the mountains between the Central Valley and the coast. One day he picked up a metal pole and was setting it in place when it touched a high-tension wire and sent a scorching electric shock through his body. When he woke up in the hospital, his left arm and right leg had been amputated." Jack was engaged to be married at the time, and though his fiancée wanted to honor their commitment, he decided it would be best not to hold her to it. Though they remained friends throughout their lives, that same year he opened a cigar store in Watsonville so that he could support himself. That summer he came to Tassajara for the first time, believing that the water would help him heal. He ran his cigar store 7 days a week, except for his annual 2-week vacation to Tassajara. Jack had an artificial leg, though you wouldn't have known it, as he always looked dapper in light blue slacks, wingtips, and a blue shirt and a vest. A gold watch chain was draped from one pocket to another, a watch he got from a customer who gave it to him as collateral for a loan in 1920 and never came back. The cherry wood cane he used was the same one he first bought after his injury, and the sturdy leather suitcase he brought to Tassajara every summer was the one that came with him from Yugoslavia. Okay, that's the end of what Laura wrote. From Jack, we learned that the dining room was built in the prior century and was called the clubhouse. He said the dorm above was used to house employees, such as the Chinese cooks who smoked opium up there. He called the big oak tree at the steps where the road ends Gossip Oak, and said it used to have 1 or 2 hammocks by it. Later he said it died because weed mixed cement at its base, and that the lime got to the roots. He said that until recent years, people would come to Tassajara to get their fill of partying and alcohol or the healing waters. Laura again. When people asked Jack the secret of longevity, he'd lean forward and wink. Raise hell, he'd say. But at other times he attributed his long life and good health to drinking the mineral water that ran out of the rocks near the old steam room. He said early days people came here for their health. Any kind of sickness, they came here to drink that water over there in the morning, first thing when they got up. We used to have a male student help Jack in the baths, but other than that, he took care of himself. I remember watching him get dressed. His underwear, then his prosthetic leg below the knee, then his pants, then his shirt, the left arm sleeve folded above where the elbow would have been, the suspenders pulled over. Did it all by himself. Laura says, one time in the dining room, I watched him put his red napkin under the stump of his left arm and fit the napkin ring over it. I tried to help, but he gently dissuaded me. I have to do everything I can do, or pretty soon I won't be able to do anything for myself. John Stace was another guest who'd been coming there for years, except he didn't use the road. He'd ride a horse, followed by a whole party on horseback. They came in from Greenfield via the Arroyo Seco River, would come in toward the end of the day, maybe 10 of them, male and female, cowboy hats, boots. They'd tie their horses out at Grasshopper Flats, walk back in. They'd be happy to have arrived and ready for the baths, but they'd have to wait till student bath time was over at 5:30. That's also when the men's side was open to women. Student dinner was 6, and guest dinner was 7, and they'd spend as much of that time as they could soaking in the hot water. They'd bathe, hang out at the pool and Narrows, drink and eat for 3 days. They'd learned to keep it down. In 1971, a whole bunch of them came in later over the road in their pickups for a special birthday dinner for John. I was assistant director, came in to say hi. We chatted a bit. John sat next to a woman who looked close to his age for a change. He said, "David, I want to introduce you to my wife." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Stace," I said. "You're the most attractive woman John's ever brought here." The table exploded in laughter, including him and his wife. I went off wondering how that had slipped out. Dick Wertheimer had been a pro bono lawyer for Zen Center for years. He came many summers with his wife Julia and usually their friends the Brodskys. Wertheimer took care of Zen Centers Incorporation when it was changed in 1968 to a corporation soul, like the Catholic Church. Both couples were old lefties who'd been through the McCarthy era. Lou Hartman, who lost his job in radio due to the McCarthy purges, a traumatizing experience for him and his family, told them his story and they commiserated. I was a young lefty and engaged with them about social and political issues, past and present, their lawyerly struggles with the inequities of the system, and always about the Vietnam War, which was highly disturbing to many of us. Wertheimer was especially helpful with student immigration issues, running interference for foreign students so they could get the right visas to stay at Tassajara. He somehow managed to establish that Nils was already a citizen because Nils's father had spent time in America when he was young and had become a citizen. I accompanied Nils to Wertheimer's office once and looked at a past issue of Life magazine featuring American Indians. As we were leaving, I asked him if I could keep the magazine, and he said, "Of course. Anyone can have anything of mine that they want. That's the way the world should be, don't you think?" "Absolutely," I said, and turned to Nils. "I'd like his jacket. How about you?" "I want the nice desk in his office." "We'll come back later with the truck," I said. "Oh, you zinnies," he said, shaking his head. A guest asked me if he could take photos. I said sure, but he should get permission from people if he's going to photograph them. His name was Kaz. Students got to eat a meal in the dining room on their day off, and Diane sat across from Kaz and his wife, Yoshi. We took a walk with them to the Narrows and went skinny dipping. They were planning on opening a Japanese restaurant in Berkeley near the university campus and invited us to come there. Later we did. It was a small place, cozy, great sushi. Both Yoshi's parents had died soon after the war, his father in a prisoner of war camp. She said she came to America to learn to study dance. She was a Buddhist, still loved dance and jazz, which she said she first heard at the military base that was near the orphanage where she grew up. Maybe someday we'll have sushi and jazz and dance together in one place. John Phillips and his wife came in with the Pages and Winners, frequent guests from Monterey. He was head of the prestigious Hopkins Marine Station in Pacific Grove, which was connected to Stanford University. The research he and his students had done was key in the banning of DDT. Biologists had been wondering why some brown pelican eggshells were tending to be so thin that they didn't hold together. That was just one of the deleterious effects that they linked to that pesticide. That was also just one chemical. His work covered a gamut of various substances that people are polluting the biosphere with. He did research on pollution by PCBs, byproducts of plastic manufacturing. He said they were finding high levels of PCBs and other contaminants, not only in Arctic mammals, but in mother's milk in California. He said that formula might be a better choice. We walked through our lush upper and lower organic gardens, ate some tomatoes we didn't have to wash. Philip said that the worst part of his work was being personally attacked by lobbyists and legislators supported by the substances he was investigating. All I was trying to do was save some pelicans, he said. I showed him a small can with an inch of pesticide remaining in it that was left over from the prior owners and said, I didn't want to dump it in the ground. He said not to worry about it, that there were 20,000 gallons of that stuff going into the earth every day in Salinas Valley alone. I assumed he was exaggerating. He painted a scary picture of an exponentially expanding number and volume of inorganic substances we're adding to the land and sea, flora and fauna. He said there would be disastrous long-term consequences. I told him I'd read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which came out when I was a senior in high school, and wondered if it had had some effect. A little, he said, shaking his head. I asked what he thought about the work of the growing environmental movement and what could we do. It's too late, he said. That was 1970. Still, Phillips could forget our mutual doom and enjoy his vacation. Found him walking up the bank from the creek above the swimming pool, a bucket in his hand. It was full of crayfish he'd caught in the water there. He was delighted, said they were the most delectable crustacean, better than shrimp. He was looking forward to cooking them up behind the pine room where he was staying. Our policy was that the critters in the creek at Tassajara were under our protection. They could go fishing elsewhere, but had to go beyond our property, same as hunters. I don't recall it being posted anywhere, and it didn't come up much. I didn't mention it. Walking back to his room with him, we ran into Suzuki. I introduced them, explaining a little about what Phillips did. Suzuki said that was very important work and thanked him for his effort. Phillips praised the way Suzuki and his students were maintaining and running Tassajara. Then he praised our crayfish and held up the bucket full of them that he was going to have for an appetizer before dinner with the winners and pages. Suzuki looked down at the bucket and gasped, then emitted a pained, "Oh," in genuine sadness and walked on. Philip said he was sorry he'd bummed Suzuki out. I told him not to worry, that Suzuki wouldn't hold it against him, that his wife fed him small amounts of meat and fish, and we still fed some meat and fish to the guests, though it was almost phased out. Suzuki would probably eat those same crayfish in a restaurant without thinking about it, I said. We were vegetarians, lacto-ovo, dairy and egg variety. But we're only bound to be so in the temple. Suzuki wouldn't even advocate strict avoidance of meat and fish. He'd say we had to kill vegetables too. When John Philip's wife died, he came to Tassajara for a week during the bleak winter interim, when it's not open for guests. That was the last time I saw him. Eldon Pura was always welcome. He was a farmer and electrician in Greenfield who'd come in and do work for us year-round. He had the nicest disposition. He'd bring a gallon of his homemade wine to lunch outside and be reminded we didn't drink alcohol. He just couldn't keep that in mind. Students had gone to visit him and drunk wine and helped him make it, stopped barefoot on the grapes. But not at Tassajara. He had that wholesome Italian relationship to wine, just part of life. Didn't drink too much or act bad. He also had a D9 bulldozer that he brought in and made what we called a dam for us in the creek out by Grasshopper Flats. It wasn't really a dam because it didn't go all the way across. A berm, I guess. Pretty far out there from the bank, maybe 100 feet. We could drive a truck on top of it and dump rocks down the side. The purpose was to divert the creek over to the other side and stop erosion on the creek banks on the side we used. We had little enough flat land as it was. It was winter interim, December 1968. Fall practice period over. Most people were gone, cold as heck. The sun behind the ridges almost the whole day, and we hardly had any heating. Bob Beck was visiting, staying in Stone Room 1. My sister Susan was visiting, staying in a priest's cabin with a little wood-burning stove. It was especially quiet. During evening zazen, a vehicle came in, didn't stop in front, but turned and roared away past the Zindo and toward the baths on our narrow dirt road, only used for hauling things during the day. After zazen, Stan was standing outside smoking a cigarette, as usual. He'd been in the office. Said that vehicle had gone out to Grasshopper Flats. I said I'd check it out. Bob Beck came with me. At first, I couldn't find any vehicle. But then I saw a flashlight's beam and noticed there was a Volkswagen bus out in the dark at the end of Eldon's berm. A man was standing next to it. I walked out and said hi. Is this 101? He asked. What do you mean? I came back. 101. Highway 101. Is this 101? You're way out in the middle of the wilderness. Los Padres National Forest. 101's an hour and a half from here. Ah, shit, he said. What about that freeway there? Where? Right over there. There's no freeway here. Just a flat piece of land with barely a dirt road and some oak trees. Maybe you'd like to rest? You a Motel 6? It kept going like that. He was totally disoriented, more than I would have thought possible. He was acting fairly normal, though, talking matter-of-factly, but he could not interpret his surroundings. Reminds me of some of the subjects of Oliver Sacks' writings on people with neurological brain damage. Then Bob discovered there were 2 women in the back of the bus. They were disoriented too, but quiet. The vehicle would have to be pulled out of there. The front tires were a good way down the berm slope. Beck had them join him in Stone 1. He added logs to the fire. We gave them blankets to wrap around themselves and sit in front of the fire. The guy couldn't remember his name for a minute, but finally said he'd been called Al. Al was getting more coherent. He said they'd taken belladonna. Oh, that made sense. Had never taken it or wanted to. As I recall, it was in some eye drops and was fairly poisonous. I don't know if Al was right, but he said the amount you take to get high is just short of the amount to kill you. In my experience, psychedelics don't generally cause one to see things that aren't there. But we can interpret what's there as being all sorts of stuff or have visions which are in a more cosmic realm. But belladonna makes people see realistic hallucinations. I'd met a handful of people who'd taken it, and they all reported that. They also all had bad trips. Seems it was a guaranteed bummer. I talked to one guy who said he saw an army of witches with hatchets coming at him. All of a sudden, belladonna'd Al jumped up. Lee, he yelled. Lee's out there. Of course, there were 2 couples. The male from the other couple was out there and named Lee. Where? Beck asked. On top of the mountain. 4 of us headed up the road. The top could be a lot of places. Going around the first hairpin turn, Beck called out, Stop! There's someone back in there. A little creek came down through there, went under the road, then ran along it. About 50 feet back, in the trees and darkness, was a person sitting in the creek in almost freezing weather. And it was so dark, it was miraculous that Beck saw him. His hands were in the air as if reaching for something. We asked him to come with us. Wait a minute, he said, I've got to get some underwear. He thought he was in his bedroom in Berkeley looking in his dresser. A while later, he had dry clothes on from our goodwill, and all 4 of them were bundled up in front of the fire. Beck took 3 to the baths to soak in the hot sulfur water. Al wanted to keep talking to the fire. I went to the baths with them. While we were there, I heard screaming. Al was gone. He was still screaming. Found him in the Tassajara Creek. Wow, that stuff sure leads people to make bad decisions, I thought. He wouldn't go back to the room with the fireplace. A skull had come out of it and threatened to take him back down where it came from. All 4 of them ended up in the no longer there large 4-room cabin with a kitchen across from the lower garden. I stayed with them. No one was hungry. The 3 went to sleep. Al stayed up and talked crazy to me till it started getting light. He would be lucid 1 hour and then not. Lee got up. He was insisting that we were in Berkeley. I said otherwise. He threw open the door, exposing the ground, trees, the hillside steeply rising beyond. See, this is Berkeley. Look at the snow. There was no snow, and Berkeley's yearly snowfall is 0 inches. This was all having an effect on me. I was hallucinating a little myself, having to make an effort to hold on to the relative sanity I was used to. Realized how hard it would be to take care of crazy people. It seemed to me to do it right, we'd need about 8 of us in rotating shifts. No wonder most professionals depend on their patients taking drugs. By 9 that morning, they'd eaten food brought on trays from the kitchen, drunk coffee, come down. Their Volkswagen bus had been pulled out and was waiting in front of the cabin for them. They thanked us for our help. The last thing Al said was what a great trip that had been. But he had to understand it better, get a better grip on it. Couldn't wait till the next one. Oh, God. This has been another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sonora with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cachita, and dear lovely Katrinka. We're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.